Hey guys, welcome back. So, let's start the Cold War. Super excited about this unit. I think you guys are going to have a lot of fun talking about it, debating it, coming up with your own theories on it. It should be pretty good. Let's get into it with the beginnings, right? Unit 11, the breakdown, 1918 to 1945. Before we go into it, I have the stages of the Cold War outlined for you guys. These are essentially going to be the units that we do for the rest of this year. And different phases of the Cold War conflict. I'm not going to read them to you. You can read them to yourselves. But yeah, this is kind of a breakdown of the time periods of the Cold War. A couple of essential questions, and this is just for this unit. This isn't for the entirety of the Cold War. But how did the breakdown happen? Right? How did the Grand Alliance break up and essentially start the next war immediately after the Second World War? What role did ideology play? What role did fear play? And then lastly, what roles did the individuals play? Those are three things to keep track of throughout this unit. I'll try to make reference to that as often as I can, but just kind of keep that in the back of your head. So 11.1, the background. This is going to be super short, super sweet, and to the point. So unlikely alliance, right? This is something that I've been saying the entire time. Russia, Britain, the United States were not strong allies. They were never supposed to be strong allies. All the evidence that we've been talking about in year one, the Anglo-German naval agreement and the White Revolution in the 1920s in Russia, those are all evidence to say that the two camps, right, the two ideologies of capitalism and democracy and communism, they don't see eye to eye, and it's very hard for that alliance to have lasted. The example that I like to make is, if you hated someone and you found out someone else hated that same person, you kind of become close out of your mutual hatred for that person, right? But then let's say that person moves away, that relationship might not last much longer, right? Because that common bond that you had is removed from the equation. And that was the United States and Russia, right? I mean, Hitler was the bond. Hitler is what brought them together, as you can see in the cartoon on the page right here. Take Hitler out of the equation, and there's nothing in common between the Soviet Union and the United States for them to build an alliance, anything other than military alliance from. So the fact that it was an unlikely alliance is definitely going to be a precursor for the Cold War conflict, right? And there's a lot of bad blood here, right? And this is going to be something that kind of chimes in throughout the Unit 11 and into Unit 12. The British and the Americans were never in favor of communism, right? As soon as the Bolshevik Revolution takes place, the British, Americans, volunteers all go over to Russia and get involved to try and stop communism from happening. And then even after the Bolsheviks take power, the white versus red revolution, right? The Russian Revolution takes place, and the U.S. and Britain support the whites. So they've been against the red state the entire time, right? And in the 1920s in the United States, we go through a whole period of the Red Scare, right? Where communism becomes so outlawed that we literally go against our own constitution to try and weed it out of our society, right? The Soviets knew what we were doing here, right? We sent people back there with the stories that was what was happening in America. So it was never this good vibe relationship between the two countries. In the 1930s, this is another big one, right? The road to World War II. The Russians were left out of the Munich Agreement. And again, this is like a slap in the face. It proves to the East that the West doesn't see them as valuable. They don't care if they're at the negotiation tables. They don't care about their opinion. They don't care about dabbling in their sphere of influence. They're going to do what the West wants to do, and they really don't value the Soviet Union enough to even invite them to the table, right? So all of these things kind of mount up to prove that it was a bad blood alliance, right? And then the end of the war, right? So you've got the communists coming in from the east, and then you've got the allies coming in from the west, and they're all converging on Berlin. And it's very unlike a winning battle, right? Because they almost feel this pressure to gobble up and hang on to whatever territory they liberate, all right? there was never this vibe of, okay, we're going to liberate these places, and then we're going to come together and talk about what's going to happen next. There was never that vibe, right? They set up something called the Allied Control Commission for places that are being liberated in the Second World War. But even in that, they didn't see eye to eye on all these places and what should happen to them once they are liberated. So the precursors for this conflict happens in the Second World War itself, right? Governments in exile, right? So I didn't really mention this when we were talking about World War II because of the virtual learning part, but governments that were forced out of their country took exile in London, all right? And they still tried to function as a government, even though their country might have been run by the Nazis, right? When those governments try and come back into the country, or while that government was trying to govern, even though it was Nazi-occupied, communist groups did not listen. Communist groups tried to do whatever they wanted. So when those governments came back into the country, the communists didn't really listen to them. So even internally, inside the countries, on kind of more of like a micro level, the communists and the Democrats, right, the democracies don't see eye to eye. It's creating a conflict from jump, right? What else do I have here? Liberated countries and self-determination, right? So the Allied Control Commission and this whole idea of self-determination happened, didn't happen. All right, places like Poland, it doesn't happen, and we're going to talk about that when we get to, I think, 11.3. That'll make a little bit more sense. But Stalin kind of does what he wants to do, and again, it starts this idea of a conflict very, very, very early on, and even into the World War II, right? And then Tito. We're going to talk about Tito a little bit more, but Tito in Yugoslavia is going to learn how to walk the fence between the Americans and the Soviets, and he is going to exacerbate this idea of a conflict by playing them off of one another. So, yeah, the conflict goes far back. It goes into World War II. It goes farther back into the 1920s. It's an unlikely alliance. The Grand Alliance is not that grand. Russian Civil War, right? We talked about that. U.S. aims in a post-war society. So even their aims are different, right? The United States wants to come in and... oh, no, this is USSR, sorry. They wanted reparations, right? They want similar things to what, like, France and Britain wanted after the First World War. They want to get back what they lost. They want reparations. They want payment for war damages. They want a buffer zone so that war can never happen in their territory again, all right? That's going to completely go against what the United States wants after this war, right? The U.S. wants a couple military bases so that it can expand its role worldwide, but it wants the open door policy that FDR wanted. It wants self-determination. It wants the United Nations. It wants decolonization. So their agendas do not line up. You can't really have an alliance if the two leading members of the alliance don't have post-war objectives that match up, right? So the alliance is an unlikely one, and that's really what is going to set up the idea of the Cold War. So that's a basic overview for 11.1. Short, sweet, to the point. Not a lot of gray area, not a lot of content here. We'll get into the content in another video. All right? Be good.